So it's hard for us to believe, but Michelle and I have almost been in Kansas City 2 years now on the team here at Westside. And when we joined the team and we were in the process of interviewing and having those conversations, Dan Chavrin asked me to put together a refreshed resume. Anyone been through that recently? You're leaving one job, you're going to another, you got to update the resume. And I got to say, we are never as awesome as we are when we are writing our resume. And if you could have read my resume, it's like, man, Billy Graham and the Pope should report to me. I'm that good. And it's a kind of an awkward experience because, I'm applying for a church job, so you're supposed to be humble. But basically with your resume, what are you doing? You're bragging, right? Check out my status. Check out my skills. I mean, you really want to invite me. And if you've been paying attention to the story, you'll see that there's this pattern that's really obvious, that's sitting right in front of us, that happens over and over and over again. God keeps inviting people to join him in his mission despite their resume. Like, if you look at their resume, it says murderer, it says prostitute. If you look at their resume, it says that, they're the outsider, they're the runt. And God keeps inviting these people over and over again. Not the people that you would expect. Not the people who have status or skills, but the people on the bottom side. In fact, write that down. That's the big idea for today. It's this. God's invitation comes to us irrespective of our skills or our status. And again, this is so counterintuitive in our culture. Because everything in our culture says your value, your worth, your identity equals your skills and your status. And yet the story keeps turning that upside down over and over and over again. And this invitation, we've been learning, is a part of a much larger pattern. So here's the big idea for the series. God desires to turn our spiral down story into a spiral up restoration story. So in other words, all of us have a resume that is jacked up. Can I get an amen? Right? All of us have a resume that have a spiral down story in it. And God wants to meet us in that. Not because we've been good enough, because we have the right skills and status, but because he's good enough and he's loving, and that's the nature of grace. We've talked about this larger cycle that starts with the invitation. And I want to look more deeply into this invitation today. What does it look like when God invites us, regardless of our skills or our status? And here's the thing I want us to get. We are so fixated on our resume, on our skills and our status, that it actually blinds us to the invitation of God. And I'm praying that this morning will be a dangerous message. Because I think many of us, we're blinded by preconceived notions about who God is and how he works. And we're so brainwashed by the status and skill seeking of our culture that we can't even perceive the invitation of God that is coming to us that could literally change everything for us. It's the thing our soul has been aching for. And there's going to be one simple prayer that I want to invite us to pray that really is the bucket that we'll put everything inside of today. And it's this simple prayer. God, give me ears to hear your invitation. God, give me eyes to see your invitation. It's a dangerous prayer. God, give me ears to hear your invitation. God, give me eyes to see your invitation. And I want to invite you now to pray this prayer to the God who is here, present, who wants to speak a living word to your soul this morning. So let's take a deep breath and just center down and actually be here. And I invite you to pray this prayer with me. God, give us ears to hear your invitation. God, give us eyes to see your invitation. And all God's people said, amen. Well, we're in chapter 11 of the story. Again, the story is not a replacement for the Bible. It's a resource to understand the Bible. And there's thousands of us that are working our way through it. And I just want to remind you to do the pre-reading. And if you did the pre-reading this week, we're talking about a story that's been told over and over and over again. One of the most famous stories in the history of humanity, the story of David and Goliath. And it is a story about an invitation. And within God's invitation to David, you're going to see there are 3 questions that will help you cut through the preconceived notions that blind us to God's invitation. I'm going to go ahead and give you the first one, write it down. Invitation question number 1. How open am I to the possibility of an unlikely invitation? And the story of David is a classic story that embodies an invitation to an unlikely candidate. Just a quick review. Saul is king, but he's made a series of very poor decisions. He's pandering to popularity. He's consulting witches. He's just flat out disobeying the guidelines that would lead to health and flourishing as a nation that God has given him. And so God communicates to Samuel, the prophet. And he says, I'm going to anoint a new king. And he sends Samuel out. He sends him specifically to the house of Jesse. So Samuel shows up to the house of Jesse, and he fully expects he's going to meet the candidate who is going to be the next king. And so he shows up, he says, Jesse, who do you have? And this is what the passage of Scripture says. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, that was the eldest son, the most likely candidate. And when Samuel saw him, he said, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. Samuel looks at Eliab, and there was something about his charisma. There was something about his stature that made Samuel look at him and go, that's the man. We don't know much about Eliab, but he's the kind of guy you look at and think, man, I'd like to get a selfie with him. He's amazing. It's so cool. Michelle and I have had the joy and privilege of traveling actually quite a bit to India over the last 15 years. We got to be a part of an indigenous church planting movement there. And what was funny is we began to notice early on in our trips that, especially when we were traveling to rural areas, we would create quite a stir because we were just so different. We'd literally been to villages where there had never been a Westerner before. And the first time we went to the Taj Mahal, it was crazy. As we're touring the grounds, over and over again, people are asking to have their picture taken with us. I can't believe that. I'm like, what? It happened 6 times that day, over and over and over again. Total strangers. They want to have their picture taken with us. We got to the end of the day, and I told Michelle, it's really frustrating that they keep mistaking me for Brad Pitt over and over and over again, It's embarrassing. I'm really reaching now, you know what I mean? I'm reaching. Yes, I am. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. You know what I get actually is Bob Saget a lot. People say I look like Bob Saget. It makes me feel really good inside. Unlikely candidate, right? Thank you, I know. That's exactly what's going on here. He's Brad Pitt, right? I mean, he's the person that people are like, yeah, you want a picture with him. Of course he's the one. But look at what it says. The Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. He's not looking at how many followers you have on Twitter, not looking at how perfect your profile picture is, not looking at the resume, all the skills and all the status. The Lord doesn't look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And here's what's really interesting. Samuel is the prophet of Israel. He's been able to hear God's voice crystal clear from the time he was a boy in the temple. And yet he's been so bombarded by resume thinking that at this critical juncture, he can't perceive who God is actually inviting. Isn't that sobering? So if Samuel is missing it, what do you think the chance is that we're missing it? That you're missing it. And God says, you're going to have to open up your spectrum a whole lot wider. So Samuel says, well, Jesse, who else you got? So Jesse starts bringing out all his other sons, one after another, after another, after another, click, 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 click. And guess what? A light bulb doesn't go on above any of them. He runs through all of the sons, supposedly, and Samuel says, Jesse, is there anyone else? Do you have someone in a back room or something like that? And he says this, are these all the sons you have? And then Jesse says, well, they're still the youngest. And youngest in the Hebrew actually means youngest. But there's actually something else really interesting about this Hebrew word. There's a connotation. It's not just youngest. You could also add this flavor to it. He's saying, oh yeah, there's the what? There's the runt. And there's actually a really weighty Jewish tradition. And I studied it this week. It's got some really good preponderance of evidence that I can't walk through today. But many Jewish scholars believe that David was actually an illegitimate son. And that's why he wasn't brought out. He was the runt. Jesse's child from an affair, basically. He was the unlikely candidate. And when he sees David, you know where he's been? He's about 14 or 15 years old. He's a shepherd. He's a nobody. A shepherd was one of the lowest status jobs that you could have in that culture at that time. It was a bad job. That's what it was. I'm sorry, that was horrible. That was a bad joke, right? I didn't do that last service. That just came out, so I'm sorry for that. And here's what's amazing. When David shows up stinking like sheep, and when you're a shepherd, your resume does not say king on it. That's not where you're headed. It says, rise and anoint him. This is the one. God says, I love runts. My specialty is the redemption of the runts. My specialty, the promotion of the pitiful. My specialty, the transformation of the trembling. You know what? I'm inviting unlikely candidates, regardless of status and skill. You know, we have a runt in our family, and her name is Ellie. She's our golden retriever. And Michelle's aunt raises Goldens, and they've won dog shows. They have this, spotless pedigree. And when Ellie was born, she was the runt of the litter. She was born with a cleft palate. She was born with a heart murmur, so they couldn't sell her or breed her because it would wreck the pedigree. She was the runt. And Michelle's aunt sent us this text with a picture of her. She was sitting in the snow in the middle of the winter. She's about this big, and she's like, this is the runt. Does anyone want her? And the next day, we got in the car and drove 2 hours to go get her. And in our house, she's our sweetheart. First of all, she's actually smarter than me. That's the truth. Goldens are just so smart. And she's just grabbed our hearts from day one. It's like she won the Westminster in our hearts. And a couple of weeks ago, my oldest daughter, Maddie, brought home a sign that she bought with her own money. And it's got a picture of a golden retriever on it, and it says, a spoiled golden lives here. We have it hanging in our kitchen. And that's the heart of God. He looks at the runt and he says, I want to spoil them with my grace. I want to spoil them with my love. I'm going to spoil them with my kindness. Because it's going to show off how good I am, how gracious I am. And that it isn't about your status and your skill. And I know for some of us in this room, it's been impossible for us to perceive the invitation of God because of the voice of Jesse in our head. The voice that says, you're not good enough, you're broken, you're dirty, you're shameful. And I'm telling you, you're the one. Because of what Jesus has done, his life, his death, and his resurrection. It is no longer about our skills or our status. It is about grace, and it's amazing, and you're invited. You are the one. And again, you look at the people God has been picking, and maybe you're here and you're saying, you don't know what I've done. You don't know where I've been. I don't have any marketable skills at all. And I want to ask, really? Like maybe you're here and you're saying, I'm too young. Well, David was 14. Or maybe you're saying, oh, I'm too old. Abraham and Sarah were so old, AARP wouldn't let them in. Maybe you're saying to yourself, you know what? I've done horrible, wicked things. Well, God picked a murderer named Moses. He picked a prostitute named Rahab. Maybe you're looking and saying, yeah, but again, I don't have, what do I have to offer? You think of Gideon. He's a farmer. God's going to call him to lead an army. When he finds him, he's wearing a pair of Depends and a wine press. And God looks at him and says, you're a mighty warrior. Does that make any sense at all? It does if you are an expert at redeeming runts. And if you can change any open heart. And I want to ask you, like Samuel, open up to an invitation. You're the unlikely candidate. So David gets this invitation. He's anointed to be king by the prophet of Israel. Now you're going to expect something really amazing to happen. And guess what happens? Now he goes back to the hill and he becomes a shepherd again. He goes back and he just does the same thing he was doing beforehand. It's not really what you would expect. He goes back and it's the same old, same old. He's just a shepherd out on the side of the hill, taking care of the sheep, day after day, week after week, year after year. And then 4 or 5 years later, the conflict between Israel and the Philistines is built to this tipping point. Now, backstory, the Philistines have been oppressing the Israelites for 200 years. And the Philistines, they want to wipe out Israel. They want to obliterate their identity. They want to obliterate their religion and their culture. It's 200 years of oppression, an existential threat. And it's built to this massive conflict where the armies of Israel and the armies of the Philistines have gathered. And what happens here is something called champion warfare. On occasion in ancient history, warring nation states or tribes would send out a champion to do single warrior combat. And that's what's happened. And word gets back to Jesse, and he sends David to send supplies to his brothers. So David isn't old enough to be drafted yet, so he's probably still 18 or 19 years old. And his brothers have all been conscripted, and they're at the front lines, and David runs up there with his bag of supplies, and he discovers there's this stalemate, that the Philistines have sent out their champion, their biggest, their baddest dude, and he's so big and he's so bad. He's like The Rock meets Shaquille O'Neal, and he's got ninja skills, and he's incredibly terrifying, and Israel is paralyzed. And David sees this, and he has this passion that starts to go off inside of him, and I want you to write this down. How aware am I to the potential of my growing passion? When David sees this situation with Goliath, something snaps in him. And he's like, that's all I can stand, and I can't stand no more. I got to do something. This isn't right. And so he gets ready to go to battle because there's this growing passion inside of him. And here's the thing I want you to get. There's passions inside of you. There's certain injustices in the world, and they drive you crazy. And they're actually different from the person sitting to your right or to your left. There's like a small number, maybe one or two, that particularly really get you. And you might not be aware of this, but that's one of the primary ways God invites people to his mission. When you have this sense of injustice, this thing that eats at you and it really bothers you. And David sees that in this particular scenario in this man called Goliath. And look at what the passage says. I want you to pay close attention to who Goliath is. It says, the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines, named Goliath, from Gath, whose height was, circle this, 6 cubits. Details matter. Pay attention. 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with scale armor. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed, what does it say? 600 shekels of iron. His shield carrier also walked before him. Now, at one level, this is a story about a figure who existed in history named Goliath, who went out for single warrior champion combat. But the writer of this passage is also doing something more subversive. And again, there's a Jewish tradition that asks us to see both levels in this story. The first one is there's a man named Goliath. But notice how he's described. It says he has scale armor. At one level, that's a cue to say, okay, the Philistines actually have advanced technology, so they've got a technological advantage against the Israelites. But also think about it. What creature has scales that we've seen early on in the story? A snake, right? And who's the character in the Bible who had scales like a serpent and whose number is 6? The Satan. It's absolutely about a man in history named Goliath. But for Israel, Goliath became a symbol for the Satan, for all that was evil, both individually, but also corporately. These massive, oppressive systems of injustice. You know, sin starts in an individual nature, but it takes on a head of steam, and then it becomes this corrupt system of injustice. And behind the Philistines, they worshiped a god named Dagon. And Dagon required, get this, he required that babies be put into bonfires as sacrifice. That had become this corrupt system of injustice and genocide, and it was coming to destroy the Israelites. In other words, think of it this way. When you think of Goliath, you can't help but think of Auschwitz or the lynchings in Mississippi. Are you tracking with me? When you think of Goliath, you got to think of little girls being sold into brothels in the sex trafficking industry. When you think of Goliath, you got to think of a child who's dying from a preventable disease. They could have a 25-cent vaccination and they would live, but it's not there. When you think of these massive, systematic, oppressive evils, you need to think of Goliath. And here's the problem. We've declawed Goliath. We've made it this heartwarming little metaphor. You know, David and Goliath. Like my kid is going to have a soccer game against a really tough team, and this is our David and Goliath story. Or my next promotion at work, that is my David and Goliath story. Now, don't get me wrong. I hope your kid wins the soccer game, crushes them. I hope you get the promotion, but that is not what the Bible is talking about. The Bible is saying there's an epic battle between good and evil. Evil exists, and it's oppressing millions and billions of people. And God is saying, I'm looking for some runts who want to get in on the battle. I'm looking for some runts who have this growing passion about a specific evil and injustice, and they're saying, I'm not going to stand here and do nothing. Let me in. I want to get involved. And I know I'm a runt. And I know Goliath is huge. I don't care. Send me in. Because our God is the God who fights for the underdog. Our God is the God who fights for the oppressed. Our God is the God who liberates the slave, who fights on behalf of the orphan and the widow and the foreigner. And he's looking for some runts to say, God, send me in. Let's go. And that's the heart of David in this passage. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, I love this. It says, David ran quickly toward the battle. And see, there's a growing passion inside of you built around some kind of injustice and evil in this world. And God wants you to know that's Him inviting you to run towards the battle. So what does that look like? Well, I have a buddy who was sitting in my garage a couple weeks ago. And he's a guy who God has set free from an addiction. And he's got a passion to see others freed. Because of the support and the community and the counseling he received from others, and now he has a sense of stewardship. And he was literally sitting in my garage, he's a Westsider, and he was like, not one more marriage, not one more family. I don't want one more destroyed by this addiction. And he's been a part of leading a support group here that is now helping others find freedom. And if you ask him, what is your Goliath? You know what he'll tell you? I'm going to fight, I'm running to the battle against addiction. So what's the name of your Goliath? What is the thing where God has freed you, or you've had a sense of blessing and privilege, and now you're realizing it isn't just about me being free. I'm not free until everyone else is free. I got to get in this battle. I got to get in this game. What is the name of your Goliath? And it may be intimidating, and you may be tiny, and all you got is a stone, but it's time to run to the battle. And it may feel like, what is this going to do? Is it even going to make a difference? Oh yeah, it'll make a difference. You'll be surprised what God can do with a runt and a sling. And that's the really cool part at the end of this story. You know, David didn't go to like a Navy SEAL single combat champion warrior Hell Week to get trained. Guess where he got trained? On the hillside, taking care of sheep, doing his everyday job. And what's fascinating, before he goes to the battle, Saul's like, whoa, you're not prepared. Come on in here. You need my stuff. You need my skills. because I'm Saul, and I got skills, and I got stuff. And look at what he says. David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. And he finally said, I can't go in these. Like he's an X small and Saul's like a triple X and he's like walking around like just weighed down. He said, I can't do this. So he took them off and then he took his staff in his hand. A staff that he used doing what? Shepherding, right? And he chose 5 smooth stones from the stream and put them in a pouch of his shepherd's bag and with his sling. Where did he use to learn his sling? Just being a shepherd, doing his everyday job. And he approached the Philistine. And here's what I want to say. In a culture like ours that is really driven by platforms and microphones and celebrity status, it's easy to think like, if I don't have a microphone, then I can't do anything. You know what that is? That's Saul's armor. It's easy to think, if I can't sing or preach or talk or do something in public, I really can't make a difference. You know what that is? That's Saul's armor. You might not have been aware of it, but doing what you do well, your everyday, ordinary, mundane skills at work, or a particular passion in terms of a hobby, or the things you've learned as a parent through a lot of hard knocks, or some crisis you went through. That's the thing God was using to actually train you. And it's those simple, ordinary things. It's your sling. And that's the question I want to ask you, this third one. How available am I using my everyday abilities? Like you're ready now is what I'm saying. God's been training you already. And he's inviting you, regardless of your status and skills. But you know what? He's given you some skills. He's trained you. And this is the question you have to ask. What is my sling? What's your ordinary everyday skills that maybe right now you've not connected the dots and they're literally the thing God's been training you in to prepare you to take down your Goliath? And I just want to tell you this story. I have a buddy who leads a fireside. And there's a guy in his group. He's been there maybe 6 months. And he's just starting to come alive to his faith and to a relationship with God through Jesus. And one of the things that has started to awaken in him is a passion about homelessness. So he started serving down at the KC Rescue Mission, just serving meals, because that's kind of what you do when you show up for the first time. And he did that a number of times. He began to talk to the leadership there, and they discovered, you know what his everyday job is? He's an IT guy. And when they found that out, they literally started salivating, because they said, we actually need to reboot our entire IT system. And so now they're asking him, can you help us use your sling? Like, you're a geek. We need a geek. Can you help me? And so he's blown away because he's like, I have this passion to help the homeless, and then I thought I was going to serve meals, and then I show up, and my thing is like, I do IT stuff, and they need an IT guy. And it's like, guess what? That's what God does. And something has your name on it. And I want to ask you to pray this prayer this week. God, give me ears to hear your invitation. God, give me eyes to see your invitation. Show me my Goliath, God. Show me my sling. And Lord, no matter where I've been or what I've done, all those things that I think disqualify me or make me not good enough, I refuse to accept them. Why? Because in Jesus, we have a shepherd king who ran to the battle for us. The ultimate David and Goliath moment. Here's all of the sin of humanity. Here is death itself. Here is hell itself. Here is Satan and all the demonic forces in the universe. And Jesus goes toe-to-toe against all of that on the cross. And when you and I couldn't pick up a stone to save ourselves, he did it for us. So you know what that means? Every single runt is welcome and invited, and you are the one. So these questions this week, will you live with these? Number one, how open am I? How open am I to the invitation as an unlikely candidate? Secondly, how aware am I to this growing passion inside of me? And thirdly, how available am I in terms of using my everyday skills? And in closing, I'd like for us to pray this prayer. It's a simple prayer that we started with. God, grant us ears to hear your invitation. God, give us eyes to see your invitation. Can you repeat that first one with me? God, give me ears to hear this invitation. And then the second part, God, give me eyes to see your invitation. And I invite you now to stand again and to open your heart to the invitation of the Lord, who David said this, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. It also says the God of angel armies. In other words, this battle, it belongs to the Lord. And it's not about you being smart enough or skilled enough or have enough status. When God calls you and it's his battle, you can trust the God of angel armies. And we'll sing to that God together.